In 2024, it's easier than ever to share your story if you're an aspiring athlete and build a brand thanks to social media and the internet. However, in some ways, it's more difficult to stand out from the crowd and build a successful career in professional sport. With national governing bodies ever increasingly focusing on smaller groups of athletes, funding an elite sportsman or sportswoman's lifestyle is a massive financial challenge. Throughout my gymnastics journey, I was supported by Red Bull, Sky Sports, MyProtein, Superdry, Turn Gymnastics, local businesses, and local sports grants, all of which helped support my career. In this episode, I break down what I would do if I was to build a professional sports career in 2024, and this is my story. So recently I've been having a lot of messages from athletes in the UK, athletes abroad as well. I've been hearing some of the athletes that have come on this podcast and shared their stories, some of which have been incredibly successful, are finding it frustrating and difficult to try and financially support themselves. I think the sporting environment has changed a lot in the period of time from 2012 to where we are now in 2024. I think obviously just globally, economically, there is less money to go around. And I think when, countries, governments are struggling financially, sport is one of those places that gets hit, funding gets cut. And it seems to me that ever increasingly smaller groups of athletes are being the athletes that are focused on in terms of the funding. So that means that the guys that are maybe in the second team or the third team or the reserve team maybe aren't competing on the floor right now in this moment, but hope to one day be filling those shoes and competing at the highest level, are struggling to financially support themselves. And I've heard a lot of in the UK, a lot of young guys around the age of 17, 18, 19, 20 are now contemplating, deliberating whether it's worth them committing to gymnastics in case it doesn't work and they can't financially support themselves. And some of those guys are dropping out of the sport, and it's a real shame. So, I had a very unique experience in gymnastics growing up. As a kid, I obviously trained incredibly long hours, but I was massively supported by my local community. My dad was a massive part of that. He was a very smart guy. He was able to talk to local businesses, talk to the local community around me, share my story, share my narrative when I had success. So I competed well nationally and even internationally at a young age. He had a relationship with the local media, so whether that was local BBC News or ITV News or whether it was local papers, and they would often come to the gym and they would do pieces on me. There'd be photos of me in the paper, and that generated a bit of a following locally. That this kid here is very, very talented, has potentially the opportunity to go and compete at Olympic Games one day. And that meant that lots of local people wanted to support that. They wanted to be a part of that. They wanted to help. And that was huge for me. And then at the age of 17, when I started to get some really big results internationally, globally, in Europe, and I competed at the Youth Olympic Games in 2017, that was when a relationship with Red Bull began, and I, at 17 years of age, started to communicate with Red Bull after I had been drinking Red Bull at the Youth Olympic Games in Singapore. Someone there at Red Bull UK had seen that. My dad had got in contact with them. They reached out, and at 18, I signed a contract with Red Bull. I believe at the time I was the only gymnast in the world that had a Red Bull contract. Later on, a gymnast called Mario Mojnik from Croatia signed a contract with Red Bull, and we were the two athletes from the sport of gymnastics that represented Red Bull. So it was really exciting, really cool. And around that time was when my dad started to think, okay, this has kind of stepped up another level. There's a lot of attention. I don't really know what I'm doing. He reached out to one of my former teammates. It was Daniel Keaton's at the time. He spoke to Daniel Keaton's dad. Dan Keaton's had representation. There was a big management group that managed the likes of Beth Tweddle, who was the biggest name in gymnastics in Great Britain at that time. Certainly the greatest female gymnast that we produced in Great Britain. And he had a conversation with Dan Keaton's dad, said, could you introduce me to the management? We had a chat with them. I was still 17 at the time when these conversations began with Red Bull, and they basically said, look, we're happy to advise you, and then when Sam turns 18, we can talk about maybe coming on board. And so that's what I did. I signed with Red Bull at 18, signed with the management company at 18, and my career up until the age of 21 kind of followed this perfect trajectory in many ways. If you were to zoom out and look at the results, Olympic Games winner medal, 2018 at 18 became the first British man to ever qualify for a high bar final. You go and find that video on YouTube, you'll see me drinking Red Bull. That was just part of my competition preparation process. So for me, that relationship with Red Bull just made so much sense because I had done that since I was a young teenager. And then at 20, I go to the European Championships and win the first British medal on high bar ever at major championships. I also sign a contract with Sky Sports, which was a big contract for 4 years. At the time in 2012, I'm sponsored by MyProtein. I have a local car dealership sponsorship with BMW. So all of this is happening right at the age of 20, 21. And then over the course of the next, I would say, 3 years, up until the age of 24, that was a period of time where I made the most money that I made in my career. I was in my prime, even though during that period I had my serious ankle injury, and then in 2016 I missed out on the Olympic Games. So that gives you an idea of just how valuable an Olympic Games is to a young athlete, especially if they go and they're able to win a medal. I often say that an Olympic gold medal could be worth, depending on whether you maximize that opportunity, also depends on the sport that you're in, maybe how many other medalists active in your sport at that time, maybe how successful the country is, but an Olympic gold medal can be worth to £1 million over the course of your life, right? And I think a silver medal is half of that, maybe a bronze medal, half of that again, and maybe being an Olympian is half of that again, right? So it's a big thing, and an athlete's career is very short. You think of an athlete's career in gymnastics, typically when I was younger, the peak was considered to be 23. Well, if you start gymnastics at 7 years of age, but you only make it, you only become a senior gymnast at 18, that gives you 6 years. 6 years to make as much money as you possibly can, that hopefully will set you up for the next phase of your life. And the chances of that becoming a reality are very small. I think I once had a look at the odds of becoming an Olympian. I think becoming an Olympian was 1 in 150,000, and becoming an Olympic medalist was around 1 in a million. So, yeah, for everybody in the UK, 60 people might have a chance of becoming an Olympic medalist, right? And that makes sense because I think the numbers are around 60. They've been around 60 medals at the last 3 Olympic Games. So very difficult. So if an athlete ever does make it to that level, I'm always somebody that is super happy when they maximize that opportunity. They do everything they possibly can to support themselves, hopefully support the next chapter of their life when they retire, because it's a huge risk you take as a young person to potentially go and train full time. You make huge sacrifices quite often as a child. So I think the athletes that do make it to the top, they deserve everything that they get. Now, I made a lot of mistakes along that journey, some of which were my own mistakes, some of which were made on my behalf. And so today, what I wanted to do was break down what I would do if I was to start again and if I was to manage myself. And I think I've broken this down into 4 phases. And the first phase is when you're a child, so under 18. What would I do? And I think in this phase, the most important thing is your training. It's 100% your training, and everything else comes after that. And I think during this phase, when you're still a child, because you are till the age of 18, I think your parents take the lead, because your parents or whoever is your, I guess your next of kin or whoever's looking after you, you might live with your grandparents, right? Whoever that is, it's their responsibility to look after your well-being and make sure that they're putting your interests first. And I think under the age of 18, it should be completely parent-led. They should be making the decisions for you, of course, talking with you, but they get the final say. Not a coach, not an agent. It's parents first. And they work with you and they communicate. And obviously, you have to go and do the training, right? And you're massively part of those decision-making. But when you're a child and you are under the age of 18, I think it should be really parent-led. And what I would do now is that basically follow the model that my dad did. And it would be not going out necessarily to try and find money, right? But what areas in my life are the biggest outgoings, the biggest costs for us as a family, and for me as an athlete, and how my parents are going to hopefully try and finance my career up until the age of 18. If it's something that I've decided to do, I'm serious about it. I think you can tell, right? The reason I say until you're 18 as well is that, if any agent comes along and tells you that your child at 15 is going to be a superstar, you need to run a mile, because nobody knows that. Until you turn 18 and you've been through puberty, there's so much that can happen. You could have an injury, you could fall out of love with the sport, the funding might get dropped from the sport, you just never know. So, it really should be parent-led in the beginning. But I think working out, okay, what are the areas here that are costing us the most as a family to support this dream, give them the best possible chance of making it. Quite often or not, they're quite simple things. It's often petrol, fuel, because your parents are going to be your taxi drivers, right? So fuel is a big one, transportation, and that might even be travelling to competitions, right? There might be times where maybe you're not on the British team yet, but you compete for England and you've got to fund your own trip. Maybe you've got to pay for the flights. There were certainly instances when I was younger, when funding was cut from Great Britain, British gymnastics at the time, that my parents had to pay for me to go and train with the national team, right? So those expenses, the travelling expenses, the accommodation, the travelling to competitions, the competition entry fees, the fuel, the petrol, you're driving to and from the gym every single day, especially if that gym is maybe not 10 minutes from your house, it might be an hour and a half or an hour from your house, and your family's decided to make that commitment. So that fuel, transportation, entry fees, that stuff. Now, and there's lots of things you can do to take that away, rather than thinking of it like, I need cash in hand. It's like, what can I do to reduce my outgoings, to make this an easier process? And so working with local businesses, and one of the things that my dad did straight away, he spoke to the local businesses in my community. So in my village, I was sponsored by my hairdressers, right? It sounds funny, but I had free haircuts from the age of maybe 9 years old, I think it was, until the age of 28 when I retired. I never paid for a haircut in my life. I'm not going to say that haircuts are the most important thing to an athlete's journey, right? But it's something. It's saving a cost, and they were incredible. #1 barbershop in Keyworth, they actually gave all the males in my family free haircuts. So thank you to them. Absolutely amazing support. My longest ever sponsor that I ever had. Incredible group of people there that run that barbers. And just an amazing thing. But that's just an example. I also worked with a butcher, a local butcher. Food's going to be huge, right? If you're a young athlete, especially if you're a young boy, you're going to be just shoveling food. It's going to be literally like putting coal in a fire, just non-stop, because you're training 6 or 7 hours a day, burning so much energy. That's such a massive addition. You're going to need to be eating a lot of protein, so it's probably food that's quite expensive. So my dad spoke to the local butcher, and they gave us free meat every month, and it was the best quality meat. It was incredible. And that was because, my dad sold the story of this journey that I'd been on. He met me, and he invested in me. And that's something I never realized as a young kid, and never really realized, to be honest, until the end of my career, when I started to lose my sponsors, that people invest in people. And that's why there were situations in my life where, I signed contracts with companies and brands because they liked me. They liked who I was, what I was about, my values, my morals. They bought into that. Not just necessarily the results. The results are important. That's what gets you through the door. But it's who you are as a person and whether they can buy into your story that seals that deal at the end of the day. I hadn't learned that as a kid. My dad knew that, and he did a great job. And the other thing is, talking to local pots of funding are always there. There is an amazing local funding in my area. Rushcliffe Borough Council, which is where I live, are amazing at funding sport. And there was always a little pocket of money every year for aspiring athletes, and I used that all throughout my career. In fact, even when I retired, they helped support me fund my coaching qualifications that are quite expensive. So they were incredible for me, the local council. And those pots of funding will exist in every local area. Quite often or not, it's like a best kept secret that nobody knows about, but those sorts of funding opportunities are open to all parents, all coaches, all clubs. You just kind of have to go out of your way to find them sometimes. And local companies, local businessmen are always there to support. So those things are really, really important. And I think building that local community and support group around you that have been with you from the beginning, because as soon as you do well and you get the results and maybe you're on TV and you go to Olympic Games, that's when everybody comes in and they want to help you. But remembering where you came from and having that connection with your local community is where I would start. I think that's massive. I think the local media thing is brilliant too. For me, it was about celebrating that success and almost bringing a spotlight to the club, not just necessarily me. It's one thing I would advise all clubs, gymnastics clubs in the country, to do, is to have a good connection and a good relationship with the local news stations. BBC Local News, we had a great relationship with them. A guy called Mark Shardlow helped me a lot through my career, became a friend of mine, loved Sergey. In fact, Sergey once got him lying underneath the high bar and asked me to do a catch-ev, let go of the bar and catch it again. He was crazy enough to do it. What an amazing guy. These people became friends, and people that I can call now have their phone number. But through that and talking to the local community and the local news and the stations, people started to follow my career, and locally people oh, that's that gymnast guy. We've heard about him. We saw him last year when he'd won that competition. Oh, that's great. And it's brilliant. Building that local community and that local support is massive, because they're the people that are going to support you in the beginning. It's where you're from, right? You often see that most athletes have a real good following from the area they're from. Here locally at the moment, we have someone like Lee Woods, got a massive local following. And that does translate nationally, but that local support is huge. And for me, it was massive. It certainly helped me help my parents finance my career in those early days. But the great thing about getting the local press to come in and do a story and celebrate that success is that it helps everybody in the club, because they would come in and the coaches would all say, we've got this gymnast as well over here that's done really, really well. And can we chat to him? And so it was great. It just helped everybody, brought a lot of awareness to the club. I'm sure it brought more kids in to do gymnastics. And so for me, that local connection with that local press is a really, really important thing. And you start to tell this story and build this narrative. And the great thing that happened as a byproduct of that was that I learned to tell my own story. I learned how to talk on camera. I learned how to communicate with people in the media world, journalists, sports broadcasters. And that set me up massively for when I then did have the opportunity to compete on the big stage, and I would have to do interviews afterwards. I wasn't daunted or fazed by that. It seemed quite normal to me. So that's what I would do. I would really focus on that local connection, but definitely parent-led, in partnership with the coach, and lots of communication with the coach, because you don't want to be interrupting training or the gym, and a lot of that stuff in terms of getting local press 100% has to come through the club. But I think you need to open lines of communication very early is super important. And another area that's very, very important is to make sure you have a good relationship with your school. Now, I know that the rules have changed in Great Britain recently, that it's very difficult now, or somewhat difficult from what I understand, for kids to be taken out of school under the age of 16 to do the training. But it's still important to have that connection with the school, because there will be more understanding about if you're going away for a training camp, or maybe you've gone to a competition, or maybe your child's training every evening from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock, don't get home until late, they go to bed, they're going to be tired, right? But if the teachers are understanding and you work together with the schools and the clubs and build that little triangle of communication between club, parents, gymnast and school, and they all work cohesively together, just makes the process a lot easier. And for me, that was huge, having a good relationship with school, because up until the age of 16 and also now up until the age of 18, you have to stay in education, right? It's going to be a big, big part of your life. You're going to have your family life, you're going to have your gymnastics life, and you've got your education. And education is important, super important, especially now. Education can be a ticket for you if you're an athlete or a gymnast to go to college, go to university. It's huge, it's brilliant, and you are going to. And I think this is where, as well, as parents, you have to really think about the future of your child after they've finished sport. The gymnast isn't going to do that at the age of 15, 16. All they want to do is train, and they're focused on now. You were a kid, right? You will know that yourself. So you have to really think about that future. Unfortunately, in a sport like gymnastics, and in most sports in this country that are funded by the UK Sport Lottery funding, there is no pension system in place. So if you're a professional athlete and at 18 you make your senior debut and you compete until you're 30, if you're not privately putting money into a pension, you have nothing there, and you're effectively working for 12 years. So that's something that I would massively recommend. And, if I was working with a young athlete now, if I was working with myself or maybe my son one day, that'd be one thing I'd be doing from the get-go. Just that habit of investing in your future from a young age. And the way that might look, I think, if I was onto the GB team at 15, 16 and I was getting given funding because I was one of the most promising, talented kids in the country, just putting away a small portion of that every month, just a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot, but towards my future, for my retirement as a pension, what an incredibly smart thing to do. If somebody had helped me, advised me and to do that when I was 15 or 16, I would have a great little pocket of money at the end of my career. It could be a bit of a backup plan. And even if, you decide to retire at 20 years old or you get a serious injury, you'd have a little bit of money there that you've been putting away. And it's what a great skill it is to learn how to save money and the importance of setting yourself up for the future. And I think, a really smart thing to do. So I'd be focusing on those things, but really training comes first. It's parent-led, and that local community and building a very local support network around the young athlete is the focus. I think once you've turned 18 then, and hopefully, you've done your job of focusing on the training, your parents have done that job of building up a little support network locally, you maybe have a little bit of a following, you're working with some local companies, it's an easier job for your parents because you're being supported financially in some areas. I think once you've done that and you go to that second phase, which I would say is between the age of 18 to 21, I think it then becomes a bit more of an equal mix between parents and athlete. Because at this point, you're 18, you're an adult, and I think you do need that responsibility of making some decisions yourself. That's one thing I missed. I think at 18, when I signed with a management and I had an accountant, everybody was taking care of everything for me and I took no ownership of it. I wasn't invested in it myself. It's like, that's going to be sorted for me. Yeah, they'll take care of me. It'll be fine. I'll think about that at the end of my career. Actually, I should have started to make some decisions and taken some responsibility and accountability myself just for my overall development as a young person. I think that would have been very, very valuable. So being engaged in those conversations, maybe it's at 18 you might get approached by a management or sports agency like I did. What I would say is that I think still at that age, your main focus certainly is the training, for sure. You're still going to have to do a lot of training between the age of 18 to 21, but I think it shifts a little bit and your main focus now is competing and results. That's one thing that I would advise young athletes now that are maybe at that age of 18, they've just turned senior, and I think they're switched on because this demographic of athlete are the ones coming to ask me, what do I do? Where should I go? How can I be potentially making some money on the side or setting myself up? So those conversations are great, and it's great that they're asking, but I think the results and the experience and the competing is very important in this phase because right now in Great Britain, if you're a young 18-year-old that maybe isn't one of the top 5 guys that went to the Olympic Games this summer, your opportunities to get out there and compete are very few and far between. Maybe you have 4 or 5 opportunities to do a competition in a year. That is not enough. We've just had Edgar Boulet, French gymnast, on at the height of his career. He had competed almost 20 times by the time it had gotten to April in the year of 2018. That's just 4 months. He's already competed 20 times. So if he hadn't got injured that year, maybe he's competing 30, 40 times. So 5 times, it just isn't enough. You have to learn the skill of competing. And between the age of 18 to 21, that's when you do it. That's when you make the mistakes and you learn as much as you possibly can. So you have to be exposed to competition and gain that experience. It's really important. And one way that you can do that is going out to countries like Germany, France, Italy, where they have gymnastics leagues. Now, when I was 18, not many British guys used to go and do this. I was certainly the first youngest British athlete to ever go and do that. I remember going out there at 18, what a new experience. It's a very strange system, completely different to the normal gymnastics competition. I was completely shocked by the way it ran. It was no warm-ups. You don't know when you're going to compete. You're reacting. I don't speak the language. You got to try and a lot of them were men. I was a child still. I'm going away without my coach. You're getting paid for the first time. How do you negotiate that contract? All of these things were alien and new to me. But what it did do was help me grow up in certain areas of my life quite quickly and make some decisions for myself. But I think the real benefit of that system and going out there at 18 is that you could potentially be competing 8 times in Germany, you could be competing 4 to 6 times in France, another 4 times in Italy. You've got 20 competitions under your belt. So I think in those early years where maybe it's difficult to get onto the senior team or break into that team because, you've still got some guys that are hanging around that are maybe Olympians with world medals. The argument is quite often you don't have the experience yet to get onto the team. We can't risk putting you in a pressured situation. Well, you only get that experience by doing more competitions, and it's so hard to go to a competition in April and then have 6 months break and do a competition again and perform consistently and do big skills. So you're in a real dilemma as a young athlete, and I think using those opportunities to go to France, go to Germany, go to Italy. There's not just one league. Some of these competitions, there's 4 leagues. So you can start right at the bottom and build yourself up. I think it's a brilliant thing to do as a young athlete to gain that experience, because I don't think there are many other places you can go to get that. You certainly can't within the UK, right? You might have 4 or 5 competitions in the year. It's just not enough. So that's some advice that I would give a young athlete, is to really maximize that opportunity to go out there at 18. And you can go with your coach. Quite often these teams fund you and your coach to go. Maybe you fly out with your family the first time. You know, it's a new experience trying to negotiate contracts. You maybe do that with your coach, or you do it with your parents, or you try and do it yourself, but get the advice from people. But I think the main part of that is getting out there, competing, getting some experience, getting some results to give yourself the best possible chance of turning up to a competition like the British Championships and performing well. Because, you know, when I look at the success of a certain generation of athletes underneath me, James Hall, Courtney Tulloch, Joe Fraser, Josh Nathan, all of those guys struggled to get onto the senior team, but went out to these competitions in Germany, France, and Italy, and they learnt the skill of competing. Competing is a skill. It's a mindset. The only way to get better at it is to do it more. And they went out there and they all became very consistent gymnasts because of that. That's one thing I'd be focusing on. If I was working with myself, or like I said, my son or another gymnast between the age of 18 to 21, let's get you exposed to as many different competition opportunities as we possibly can. If you're not going to be giving them competing for your country quite yet, let's get you out there. New experiences. I think it's brilliant for developing yourself as a young person, traveling, seeing new cultures. So that would be one thing I'd definitely be focused on. You can also make money doing these competitions. You go out there, even if you start at the bottom. I've heard the numbers I'm hearing about in these top leagues are double the amount of money you could make when I was competing there. So an amazing opportunity to go out there, make a bit of money, build that self-confidence and self-worth. Wow, my gymnastics is valuable. Because unless you're competing at the highest level and you're one of those top guys in the team, it's quite hard to, sometimes you struggle with that self-esteem, but going out there and getting paid to do the thing that you love and you're good at, it's great. It builds that confidence, and you bring that back to the UK ready for those competitions and those training camps. So I'd focus on those, but I think building that narrative between that age of 21 is really good. By that time, you know, you've maybe been doing gymnastics 10 years, you've got your story. When I think about the story that I tell, now it's all about how a hyperactive kid found gymnastics, struggled at school, but when I came to the gym for the first time, it was a place I felt I could really express myself. Gymnastics was just the perfect fit for me. You know, I was the boy that had to choose between gymnastics and football. That became my story. And that story, that narrative, and that journey to the Olympic Games in 2012 is still the same story I tell now. And that was happening between those ages of 7 until I was 19, 20. So think about your story, your narrative. How can I tell that? Maybe I could write about it. Maybe I could document it on social media. Maybe I could start a YouTube channel. There's so many ways now that you can share your story, tell your story, and bring people along that journey with you. It's one thing I wish I had done way more, especially when I was competing. But when I was a young athlete, I tried to do it. I didn't do it consistently, but it's an amazing thing, and you learn so many skills through doing that. Whether it's editing, whether it's videography, learning how social media works, how to build partnerships with brands, understanding your value, what you're bringing to the table. You know, I'd say around 2013, 14 was when I started to see in contracts with brands and sponsors that I would work with, they started to incorporate social media posts. There was a bonus structure for certain social media posts. That's when I started to see that come in. So yeah, definitely building that narrative, understanding your story. And I would start at that age between 18 and 21, going into schools and doing schoolwork. It's one thing that I think young gymnasts for certain, but young athletes don't utilize enough. You have that story. Being able to communicate is massive. The number one fear is public speaking. So if you can learn how to conquer that fear, it's going to put you at a huge advantage when someone sticks a microphone in front of your face when you get the opportunity for the first time, if you're competing at a major championships. If you're well-spoken, you can tell your story. That's the type of person that somebody wants to invest in. And a great place to practice that is at schools in front of children. Because if you make a mistake, it's fine. They don't care. You know, they're so engaged in your story and they want to hear about it because they never get the opportunity to hear from a young athlete or a young person that might have an inspiring story for them that they can resonate with. And, for me, even when I go into schools right now, like my assemblies and the story that I tell, I've told that 1,000 times. So it's easy for me, but I learn things and I try new things. I test things out. Okay, what about if I try this bit? Or I maybe walk to this side of the room when I'm telling this part of my story and I listen for, is there a bit of humor that I can add in for the kids, but also for the adults in the room? Like, it's an amazing place to try things out so that then when you get the opportunity to speak to the world on TV or on the radio or really share yourself and sell yourself and your story and your dream and what you're about, you're prepared for it. And you can also make some really good money doing those school things. There are lots of companies out there like Sports for Schools who I work for and worked for in the past that are constantly on the lookout for new athletes that are prepared to go into schools, share their story, do a fitness circuit. And the only way you get better at those things is trying them. And I would massively recommend that to young athletes because it's a great way to share your skills, also give back, which is a great thing to do. It helps with you feeling a bit more grateful and also understanding that at some point your career is going to come to an end and you want some kind of legacy to give back. So it'd be those things and building those partnerships, like I said, communicating effectively, parents, coaches, the athlete, so those local sponsorships you've worked with, and maybe broadening that out and approaching bigger companies that might want to come on board. Thinking about that narrative. And that's what I would focus on. For me, personally, I probably would stay clear of management and agencies at that point, unless you had an athlete that was incredibly successful, incredibly fast, and all of a sudden he's getting a lot of money thrown at him. I think at 18 and 21, if you're getting funding from UK Lottery Sport, it's probably a good time to have a conversation with and get some financial advice and speak to an accountant, because they can support you and set you up. And maybe if you're a family that's not had a young person in your family that has been from an early age making quite good, considerable money from what they're doing, it's a really good idea to get some financial advice. For me, I had an accountant that looked after me from the age of 18. He still does now. And luckily, he knew exactly what he was doing, worked with a lot of athletes, was brilliant, very trustworthy, and supported me throughout the whole of my career. And I call him now if I have any questions. And their main focus is making sure that they look after their athletes and after their career, continue to look after them and work with them. So I would definitely say in that period of time between 18 and 21, getting some sound financial advice is a great idea. And investing that money in the right places. If you're getting sponsorship, not all of it should be going into your bank. This is where you should be focusing on things like, nutrition, sports psychology, physio, a partnership with a local gym, fitness gym. You start doing strength and conditioning at 18, right? These things, it's like investing in yourself first. At that point, when you're 18 and you're 21, you've got so much to learn. And I think you need to invest in you as an athlete, ready for that next step in the future, where maybe you're getting to 21 and beyond. And that is where you're kind of coming into the peak of your performance. And that's when it becomes a bit of a different conversation. So I think between the ages of 18 to 21, it's parent and athlete led. And obviously you're still communicating with the clubs and the coaches and the national staff. And it should be more about investing in yourself, investing in your child or the athlete at that point in time, and starting to have those conversations with accountants, maybe management and agencies about the next steps, and maybe conversations with bigger brands and sponsors that are maybe coming to you. So yeah, building that narrative in that period is really important. And then the next phase, the third phase, I say, is between the age of 21 up until 25. And, I talked about 23 being a peak. When I look back at my own career, I'd probably say that the ages of 21 to 23 probably was my peak because of the way that my career panned out and the injuries that I had. That was certainly a period of time where I made the most money in my career. I had a spell of results where I won, I think, between the age of 20 until 23, I won 6 major championship medals in that short space of time. 19 until 23. So that kind of makes sense and runs true with that being like that real important time. So I think in that phase, that's where potentially you can look at management and agencies and bringing somebody on board that really understands how to look after your best interests. And at that point is maybe where parents start to take a step back and it's more athlete management led. And at this point, I think you need to get a lot better at time management, because you might be working with big brands and sponsors that are supporting your career. And you have to be able to understand that the training is going to be incredibly important. The competitions are going to be incredibly important. And you need to develop that skill of planning and organization and effective communication between everybody involved in your little support network. Because that's where I made quite a lot of mistakes. And they were well-intentioned mistakes. You know, I felt at that time that my priority has to be training and not missing training. And what happened was some of those relationships with those massive supporters of mine and those people like Red Bull, they broke down a little bit, because when they were doing athlete engagement days where they would get all the athletes at Red Bull together, we would meet, communicate. Quite often or not, I had to say, no, I need to train, when actually I could have taken that day out if I had been more organized ahead of time, sat down and really planned things out. And look, that can be the job of an agent, right? It can be in part your job. And what I think effectively, the most effective way of doing that is having everybody in the same room talking together at the beginning of the year and planning that out. Really being managed, being super organized, knowing that, okay, from the coach, this is the most important time of the year. This is where we've got the important competitions and the important training phase. So right now, they're very limited in the amount of time we can give to supporters and sponsors and take time out of the gym. But after that, there's a period of 6 weeks where the training is going to be light. You can take a bit of a rest. And I think those types of conversations are very, very important. And when you start having those conversations with companies like maybe Red Bull, Adidas, all of these big brands, that's where you do need those expertise of those sports agents and management that have been in those conversations and those rooms before, and they know how to negotiate on your behalf. But it's making sure that you trust them. They do have your best interests at heart, because in that world, I fell victim of this. There are a lot of people that can talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And they're very good salespeople, so they'll tell you exactly what you want to hear. And in the beginning, I had a brilliant agent. His name was Andy Digweed. He was class. He was brilliant. And then I ended up moving overseas to South Africa. And the next two agents that I worked with, it just didn't feel like they really were giving me their 100%. And quite often than not, they would tell me what I wanted to hear. They weren't able to answer my questions, and they were just kind of feeding me things and telling me about leads that they had. But, you know, I think in reality, nothing was really happening, and they were quite happy to sit on their 20% commission. In the end, I got frustrated with this, and at 23, I chose to leave the agency. And from that point onwards, I actually tried to represent myself, which is difficult. So I completely understand how tricky it is as a sports agent or a management or as a parent going into those conversations when maybe you've got no idea how to navigate that. But that's why I think if you include everybody in that conversation from an early age, and you encourage your athlete, gymnast, child to take ownership, take accountability. What do you want? What do you want from your career? What's the legacy you want to have? What do you want your future to look like? If they take that ownership, especially in that time between 21 and 25, it will help you make those decisions. And money isn't always the most important thing. I think it's very important that those partnerships and relationships that you build are authentic. You know, for me, that's the most important thing. You know, I've been in situations where I've said yes to things when I was a younger athlete. When I was there, I was like forcing things. I was faking it. I was pretending. Why am I even here? Even to be honest, at times competing in those leagues abroad, I felt like I was just going there for the paycheck. I didn't really embrace the experience, get to know the guys at the club. And that was a mistake of mine, and something that, you know, I wish I had done differently. But that was probably because I really didn't sit and think about what I really wanted. And I think being involved in those conversations and really being the driving force and motivator, once you're at that age of 21 and, you know, you're now an adult and you can pretty much do everything at 21, right? That period of time, I think you need to take real ownership, but it's an important time to probably get the right financial advice, but also look at some management potentially, and for the parents to start to take a step back. Because one thing that's difficult is that if you are a professional athlete and maybe you've not gone down the route of education and you've become a full-time athlete at 18, quite often or not, you hear about this in football, right? Everything's taken care of for you. You seem to find this, and the more successful you are, the easier everything is, the more people give you free things, and all of a sudden, you know, you turn up to an airport and the coaches or maybe the head of a delegation takes your passport off you, so that's taken care of, and you're losing all these opportunities to actually go out there and stand on your own 2 feet. So the more that you can do that, the better, and the more involved you can be in the decisions that are made for you, yeah, the better. So I think between those ages, they're the big things, that management, getting the right advice, and also starting to collaborate with people, collaborate with the brands, talk to them, and understand, I think, that quite often in those relationships, you have to think about what can I bring to the table and what can I give to you, not just what you're going to get back. For me, it was always, what can you give me? What am I getting out of this? Sometimes it might not be money. It might be the relationship or the advice or the expertise of those people in that field and that brand or that company that want to work with you. Like, there are lots of different ways that you can help people. Sometimes it could be work experience. It could be an interest that you've got. They might know someone that knows someone. The older you get, you realize that life is a people game. So slowly collaborating, building those relationships that might stay with you for the rest of your life, and beginning to understand the importance of networking. You can't do it on your own. There's no way. If an athlete stands there in front of you on a TV screen, say, this was all me, I did this, they're lying. It's not true. You can't do it on your own. You need the support of people around you. And the most successful athletes that I've seen, and the ones that at least get the most work after they've retired, are the ones that people talk about in the most positive light when they're not around. They go, oh, what a great guy that guy is. He's amazing, isn't he? Yeah, so when an opportunity comes up, they think, I'm going to ring him. He'd be great for that. And you start to help each other and build each other up, and a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think understanding these things at that age is super, super important. But once you get then to that age of 25, and maybe between 21 to 25, you've had some success, you've got some medals, you've got some results, you're getting that support, that backing, you've got a big following, maybe you've built that on social media. I think at that point, once you get to 25, that's when you really maximize everything that you have. It's when you have the most leverage, because you have the experience, maybe you have the medals in your locker. You understand how to navigate that world of sport and the politics that are involved with it. You've got a bit of an understanding of how to look after yourself, manage yourself. You've got that responsibility. You've got the right people advising you, and you can take a bit more ownership. And I think at that point, it should start to become a bit more athlete-led. Because in the end, in that last phase of your career before you retire, once you retire, you have to understand that the world of sport will move on, and there'll be the next athlete that comes through. And if it's managers, they'll have another athlete to manage. If it's coach, they'll have another athlete to coach, right? So you have to realize that it then becomes very much about your future, your life, and how you set yourself up to be successful and live a good life after retirement. And I think in this phase, that's where you maximize everything and use all the leverage that you've got. And so whether that's with sponsorship deals, whether it's with companies and brands, whether it's that networking, starting to think about, right, what do I want to do after my career? What could be a career that I want to go into next? What are my interests? Can I maybe go back and study? Can I look at maybe schools is something that I want to do, but I want to speak to somebody at the company and get some work experience, go and work for them. Can I work with you for a week? I've got an interest here in this area. Maybe I've got an interest in sports management. Maybe I've got an interest in strength and conditioning. Maybe I've got an interest in coaching. Really start to invest in your development of the skills you're going to use later on in your career, and think about that future. And if you'd have taken care of all of these things from start to finish and you've been a successful athlete, then maybe over that time you'd have been putting money away every month into a little pension, right? And you'd been investing in yourself and the skills, developing yourself. And that's the role of a good manager, a sports agent, or a parent. They're going to do that for you. So when you get to the end of the career, it's not I've finished, I've got nothing, what do I do now? Everybody's left me, I'm on my own. How do I fit into the real world? You set yourself up before you've even finished. And that maximizing that, thinking about the future, thinking about your legacy. Is there a way that I can give back? And I think starting to think about giving back is huge. I think you appreciate life a lot more when you start to do that. And I think it's a great feeling. And it also highlights what it is maybe you're going to want to get into and what your passions and your interests are. Because when you've spent 20 years doing gymnastics or doing a sport, you probably don't know too much about yourself and what else you're interested in, because all you're interested in is doing your sport. So discovering that, and it can be a very daunting experience, or it can be a very exciting experience depending on how you approach that and how you've set yourself up. So I think at the end of your career, I think some advice that I would give an athlete, we've just had an Olympic Games, so there'll be lots of athletes in this position that maybe want to continue, but potentially might think, I don't know if I can make it to the next Olympic Games. Start to think about whether you can represent yourself. I did this at the end of my career, and I sat in rooms and I negotiated with companies like PhD nutrition, super dry. I negotiated my own contracts. I had no idea what I was doing, but it was a great experience, and it taught me so many valuable skills that I use today. Understanding your leverage, your value, what you're bringing to the table, understanding what are the rules of the game, how does this work? That's very important. And that's something that I learned through being in those situations where I tried to negotiate for myself, because nobody's going to negotiate better than you are for yourself, right? No one's going to have your best interests at heart more than you are. And you're going to be able to sell your story better than anybody else. And I think, hopefully, if you'd have spent those 20 years understanding how to tell your story, how to communicate with people, and you developed all of those skills that I really didn't understand that I had at the time and that I had been developing throughout my career, but I understand that I did now, it will set you up for the next stage and the next chapter of your life. And it's something that I'm super interested in. It's something that I'm looking at getting involved in now. So if there are any athletes out there that are considering competing in the leagues in France, Germany, Italy, that maybe are looking for management, maybe you're at the end of your career, you don't have any representation, you're not quite sure how to sell yourself, sell your story, sell your narrative, how to talk and negotiate with potential sponsors, how to go about getting local support, local funding. Maybe your parents that have got young athletes that have got some real talent. Maybe you've got people knocking on your door trying to offer you money. Maybe it's agents saying, whoa, we've just seen your kid, he's doing really well, we'd like to represent him. If there is anybody out there that would be interested in talking to me about potentially working with me, whether that's mentoring, management, negotiating contracts, that's something that I'm really, really interested in. It's one thing that I want to do in order to give back, because I had those experiences where I felt that, I had two agents that I really didn't feel like looked after me properly, didn't have my best interests at heart. It's something that I'm passionate about. I want to see as many athletes as possible going on to be financially stable, to support themselves, and then hopefully one day a family and their support network, be more educated, go into those conversations with confidence, understanding their value, especially at that young age, at 2021. Your national governing body, British Gymnastics, Team GB, they need you. You're the guys that's going out and winning the medals. Those medals and that success is what funds that whole system. So understanding that is super important. So yeah, anybody out there, please feel free to contact me. You can contact me directly. You can email me at samoldhamgymnastics@gmail.com. But I hope you've found that valuable. And I'm talking directly to young athletes now that have aspirations of competing at the highest level. It is difficult now. There are so many successful athletes out there, and because anybody can share their story now with social media, you really have to try and stand out in order to have a successful professional career, especially in a sport like gymnastics where it's still very niche and there's not a lot of money to go around. You can do it. It's possible. I've seen athletes do it. I've done it myself. So the opportunity is there, but you have to go out and you have to make it happen. And whether that's in partnership with your parents, your coaches, representation, management agencies, whoever it might be, there's an opportunity to do it. And it isn't for everybody, of course, but I really feel that blueprint of my career, although I made lots of mistakes, I think it was a successful blueprint. I'm very grateful for my dad for setting me up on that way on my journey, and everybody that supported me in my career, all the sponsors, everybody that worked with me, people that continue to work with me today, anybody that's ever offered me any advice, all those little bits of information have helped put me in this position now where I really think I can give back and help the next generation of athletes come through. So yeah, reach out, and I hope to hear from you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Make sure to subscribe, and yeah, you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, and thank you, everybody. I'll see you in the next episode.